You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. Last day of May, Scott. Happy May? How's it all over already? I don't understand.
It goes so fast. Remember, we did the podcast, like we're getting into our favorite part of the year, and it's done.
Yeah, it's
It
done.
went through, and kids are out of school now, and it's officially summer.
Pacers are unfortunately done. Indy 500's over, and now we have to relax and enjoy ourselves for a couple of months because we have nothing else to watch. It's kind of a shame.
I'm excited for our. I mean, we didn't talk about it, but I will announce it here. We are suing the NCAA from Crimson Cast, so I'm excited to see how everybody's winning against the NCAA. So I figure just throw another lawsuit in the mix. And I mean, it's like a bill in Congress. We'll just get passed through with everybody else.
It feels like a fail-safe plan. I 100% agree with you. So yeah, wish us luck.
Crimson Cast $1 million a year, and it's like whatever, we're paying everybody else, whatever.
If you'd like to provide some pro bono legal services, we'll certainly accept them. Anyway, we are going to talk Indy 500 today. Shorter episode, but we wanted to recap the race. Several of you have asked for that, and we were both there, so we'll talk about it. Before we get to that, just a reminder, we are brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions and Indy 500 fashions, as you can see from what I'm wearing right now. I love this Snake Pit t-shirt. I'm not just saying that. I ordered it myself. I was really pleased with it. Whole Indy 500 collection on Homefield Apparel's website. You've also got the Little 500 collection. You've got the McLaren collection. You've got the Hendrick Motorsports collection. They're just all over the place in your racing grill. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And hopefully some of you got a chance to go to that event that was held, that was hosted by Shutdown Fullcast with Alanis King. I was there. That was a lot of fun. They're really stepping into the racing area, which I love, Scott. So head over to homefieldapparel.com and get your racing gear. Also, just a reminder, we're on Substack, crimsoncast.substack.com. Be sure to subscribe for free, get podcasts sent right to your inbox. There's also a VIP function. We'll have a VIP video up, I think, later today. I'm recording one. And folks, it's, that's the place to go. Is the best that I can tell you. Join the over 900 people that have subscribed to the Crimson Cast Substack. All right, Scott, let's recap the race. Let's talk about the day first. I left my house at 6:00 and then discovered that Doug Bowles had come out and said, we're not starting for hours, essentially. And that was a little bit disappointing. So I got to the tailgate area that I normally utilize, which is outside the stadium at 7 a.m., 7:20 a.m., somewhere in that range. And it was like, oh boy, we're settling in for a long day. And that's exactly what happened. What was your experience like in the lead up to the eventual green flag at around, 4:30?
Yeah, I mean, we left about the same time. We had a babysitter watching our kids, which we'll factor
in. We did too.
Yeah. And luckily we texted her. I'm like, hey, it might be a long day. She's like, okay, we're okay. And it's like one of those, like, I'm fine with that. I'm like, are you sure? Like 10 o'clock could be the answer of the question that we're asking. Got to our normal parking spot, met up with some friends. We did kind of a pseudo, just kind of by the car tailgate. Walked in. I have a buddy who works in the Snake Pit in a certain capacity, and he texted me about 10 o'clock, and it's like they're going to call it at 11:15. Like they're going to send everyone to the stands, and it's like I don't know what to do. It's like, I mean, we're not going to walk back to the car. Like I know so we ended up just finding a spot, and a lot of the IMS is metal bleachers. We found a spot that was cement. I looked for seams because I knew it was going to drip. And we found a really nice spot under the bleachers, and we just kind of posted up at 10, 11 o'clock. Found our spot, and then we hung out there until probably 3 o'clock, and we met a bunch of people, had some fun. But yeah, just kind of sat there and waited it through, and some people got completely poured on. There was kind of at least in my area, again, you're talking about a huge venue. There's probably a lot of different perspectives, at least in our area, which is kind of under the A and B stands. It was very jovial for the time that it was going on. Like there was a moment where, because the call comes at 11:15, and there's like an hour and a half before they actually evacuate the state, the IMS. And there was somebody at the top of the venue, like the top of the stairs, just throwing dollar bills off, like in a very fun way, like threw a dollar bill, and everybody's like, ah, and somebody catches it, like, oh yeah, and like that went on for like 30 minutes, like maybe $20 worth. It was like 30 minutes of entertainment. But at least for me in my area, it was, fans were talking and we were having a good time. Like it was very kind of jovial and almost like a rain delay in baseball. You start doing the wave kind of thing.
Nice. Yeah. I went a different way when the rains really started to come. I can't reveal where I hang out because I've been sworn to secrecy because it's like the perfect spot. It's a perfect in and out. And there's an establishment there that I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time in, but they had beer.
Put in the VIP video. Let's make that worse.
I'm not doing it. I actually, our good friend Bob Moats from X's and Joe's, or as you would call him, X,
right. On the home network. Yes.
Yeah, on the home network. He's like, we cannot let anybody know about this, and so I'm not going to say anything. But I will say that I whiled away the hours. We were watching television. There were pool tables. I didn't actually play pool, but there were pool tables there. It was a nice establishment.
Yeah, I was bummed because I'm sitting here on the cement floor in a cement dungeon, and I look at I'm seeing Twitter. I look at you, and it's like, oh, like they're putting on Sweet Caroline. You're like, it's like, well, goddamn, at least you have music. Like, at least stop bitching about Sweet Caroline. At least you have music where you're at. You have pool tables and food.
And it was interesting because there was another establishment not far away that some other members of our extended party went to. So, we found ways to keep ourselves busy. And then, of course, the call came that, hey, we're going to be doing this. And it's like, all right. So it was like, when do we go back in? I went and took a nap in the truck because it had been a long day. And I had been at Pacers Celtics game 3 the night before. So I didn't get home until close to 1:00. And then I had to turn around and leave at 6. And so I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, man. But I did, fortunately, and got to the venue. And it was interesting because once, I feel like for those of us who were coming in from outside, everything went real fast once we got in there, which was nice. And I really appreciated that they kind of sped up introductions. They got everything going. We got the flybys were still perfectly timed. Like, all of that was really good. And it felt like a normal day once they actually got things in chain. And I was really curious how that was going to go, Scott, because I don't think it's always been like that. And so I do think that the whole IMS operation deserves a ton of credit for kicking it back into gear as soon as they knew that they were going to have a chance to get the race in.
No, and logistically, how they were able to basically have the pre-race, all the pre-race pieces still be done in different areas and kind of a different timing was pretty amazing how they were able to seamlessly do that. And honestly, if you have YouTube TV, there are moments where it's like, enjoy this moment of zen where it just sounds like a bumblebee flying. There was, outside of the noise of the blowers, there was kind of a zen moment of just sitting there watching them dry the track that was kind of hypnotizing, just watching these things go by and watching the track actually get dry. And it was pretty amazing. They got that whole thing done. Again, in the world, we kind of overpromise, underdeliver. It's like Doug Bowles, everything he was saying on the pre-race when I was driving in was like, oh, it takes 77 minutes to dry the track, 77 minutes. And then suddenly it's like, well, it's going to take 2 hours to dry the track. It's like, all right, I figured that. But they got it done incredibly fast. Yeah. And everything got lined up and it got done. And I mean, we got, for those who were in there, it was fast. And you get there, like all of a sudden, they're like cars are going to the grid at like 225, 240 or so. So it was cool how they got it all set off.
So then we get into the actual. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing with the start of the race. So where I sit, sorry, it's like we're right in the A stand area, and we haven't seen a first lap crash in a while. But I was right there watching Ken Griffey Jr. get in the pace car. He got out. The car goes down pit lane and kind of parks right at the entrance to turn 1, kind of off to the side, and you see Ken Griffey Jr. kind of getting out. Like, he's kind of like, oh, this was fun. And like, there's like 2 IndyCar officials like, all right, let's go. Get out. Cause like they have to get, I think, Sarah Fisher into the actual pace car and like do the pace car. Like, all right, this is real pace carring. So it was fun seeing that hustle to get him out. Cause he's kind of like, hey man, that was awesome. Like, yeah, great. Like, they're pulling him away from the car.
I missed that altogether. That's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, so then we dive into the race itself, and the race, obviously you get that crash on the first lap, which reminded me of, I think it was 2001. Was it that Greg Ray crashed on the first lap? I'll always remember that. I think it was Greg Ray. But the race quickly, it felt like was going to be one of those things where it's like, well, they said that we were going to have to, flag it regardless at 8:20, and you're thinking, okay, we're starting at 4:40. We got plenty of time. After like the 4th yellow, right, you're kind of like, I don't know if they're going to get this in. And it was a weird kind of race in a bunch of ways, in that it looked like Penske was going to dominate right from the beginning. Now, we found out that wasn't necessarily true, and it really turned out that Penske was only good when they weren't in traffic, which was interesting. Like, Will Power got sucked back into the pack and gradually just kind of went backwards the whole time. Scott McLaughlin, when he wasn't leading, wasn't really that good. But you and I were texting back and forth, and it was, on the one hand, I've seen people in online discussions talk about how, that race was awesome. It was really close from beginning to end. And it was, but so much of it felt very dependent on weather conditions. It felt like when the sun was out and the track was heating, cars just could not get close enough to each other to really make a lot of passes. There was not a lot of position exchanging that was taking place. There was a little bit of trading of the lead, but you get that. But all the action was really happening on pit lane. And while the pack certainly stayed close together for those first 150 laps or so, it really didn't feel like we were getting a race that was going to be a memorable one in terms of the actual on-track action.
Totally agree. I mean, it was great for the 3 or 4 laps after the restarts. And then after that, they just got strung out. And there wasn't really even a lot of passing in the back of the field. You started to get some different, fuel strategies going on after about the 50 to 100 lap mark. But this kind of, as a whole, I don't want to spoil the ending. But, this kind of reminds me of some of those races from the mid 80s where you look back and it's like, oh man, like that was a great race with, Michael Andretti, pissing out at 180. And then, the Al Unser, Scott Goodyear thing. It's like, go watch that race. It's boring. Like there's very little passing. There's like 6 cars on the lead lap, like not a lot going on. It's just a great ending to the race. I feel like this is very much in that ilk, that the end was good. Like you said, the last, I don't particularly like the stat of how many, passes for the lead, because like 2/3 of those were just Arrow McLaren cars swapping the lead every lap. And it's like, that's not a true pass for a lead. That's a team swapping who's going to do fuel strategy. But I mean, it is a pass for the lead. So whatever. But yeah, I mean, you definitely saw that the cars were having some issues. And it was also interesting because, you kept hearing on the radio that, they just had not dealt with this kind of conditions. Indy cars have never run this late. They've never practiced or done anything after 5:30, 6 o'clock. So it's like the shadows were in places they hadn't dealt with. The track temp was going down, so all of it was interesting. But I'm with you. There was long stretches where it felt like everyone was playing out the stretch, which unfortunately kind of seems to be happening at Indy now, where everybody treats laps 25 to 175 with kind of like can we just get through this stretch and get to 175?
And you and I were texting back and forth about whether or not that was something that you could change. And I do think that ultimately Indy's in an interesting spot where you really do want the last 50 laps to be competitive. I don't know that there's a way that you can make the last 50 laps competitive without having it work like this. But as you said, so much of it really was dependent on the fact that we were racing in uncharted territory with all of this. And who knows what the way that the track responds to the drying so quickly before you put the cars out on the track. It was interesting as it got a little bit later. Like it was clear, like 3 and 4 were less racy than 1 and 2, but that was because the sun was clearly. I was in 3. The sun was shining down on 3 and 4 for almost the entire time, whereas 1 and 2 seemed to be more covered in clouds. It's kind of the cool, weird thing about the speedway being so big, but. Most of the passes, like 3 didn't become racy until the very end. And obviously it was the key turn, as it turned out, in the entire track for the race. But I did think, as I reflected on it a bit more, it was interesting to watch teams like going way off of fuel strategy. It ended up not working in the end for those teams. But it was at least something that held our attention a little bit during the race itself. You combine that with what was a surprising number of both crashes and mechanical failures that we saw throughout the course of the race, not just that opening lap, but obviously, the whole subplot of Honda having trouble throughout the course of really the entire race. And then just some of the random accidents that were starting to happen. And it's like, there was more action than I remembered there being. And I think a lot of it was like kind of getting a step back and thinking about things more collectively. It was just interesting.
So one of the skills that I think I have, not many, but one of the skills I'm really good at is I have a scanner. I can get to the radio of the drivers right after wrecks. And if you don't, if you're not super into IndyCar, the drivers cannot talk until they push a button on the steering wheel. So if you see a wreck happening, you can get to their car and you can hear everything the driver says afterwards. And I thought it was interesting. Marco Andretti wrecked at 113, hits the back of the wall, and he's like, damn it. And he said in his post race, he's like, we are on the same strategy as Scott Dixon, and like that's the right one to be on. I thought we could have been there. That made me start thinking about the fuel strategy at that point. It was funny. The team's like, you okay, man? The car looks all right. And Marco's like, dude, my back is killing me. It's like, my back hurts. My car's done. Like, well, Marco, we think you can go. And he's like, they're making me get out. And it's like, he just like gets out. And it's like, but
well, there was another one.
Like when I realized Dixon was on a different strategy, and it's like, oh man, Dixon's going to do this again.
There was another one where there was a crash, and I forget who was it that they stopped the car rather than trying to get it back to the pits, and it was
Power?
I can't remember now, but there was another one like that. They were talking about it on the broadcast where it's like it looked like he could have gotten that thing going again.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, there were a couple like that, but the whole thing is really kind of interesting. Was it Herta? Maybe I forget, but regardless,
Colton went out too. That's right. Yeah.
But anyway, it was obviously a disappointing race for a couple of teams. I mean, Andretti loses both Andretti and Herta, and then obviously you had, Meyer Shank did not have a great day. Ganassi had a terrible day with some of their extra cars. But it was interesting to watch kind of the chess match that was going on among the various other teams as we got into that last stretch, which was the longest green flag stretch of the race. It was like the last 55 laps. There were no yellows. So it did end up kind of taking some of the back markers out. We ended up with, I think, 22 cars finished the race. 21 of them finished on the lead lap, which we were just talking about the race from last year on our preview podcast. And it was like, it's surprising how many cars were that close. I mean, of all the cars on the lead lap, the one furthest away from the lead was Kiffin Simpson, and Simpson was 11 seconds behind the leader at the end of the race. So you did end up with a lot of cars that were at least in striking distance. But then you look through, and obviously this kind of ended up being one of those races where it's like you had Penske and you had McLaren. Ganassi was around, and it felt like largely because of strategy, because those engines just weren't doing what they needed to do in comparison with the Chevys. But you see Dixon kind of coming out of nowhere there on those last 50 laps, and it's like, is he really going to pull this off? As bad as they qualified and as bad of a day as Honda's had. So I thought they deserved a lot of credit, but it really did feel like it was always going to come down to Penske versus Arrow McLaren. And I thought that chess match was really interesting in as much as McLaren had more cars at the end of the race that could race in more conditions, but Penske with Newgarden seemed to have everything in one package. And they took advantage of some strategic mistakes, I think, that Arrow McLaren made, especially with when they brought Rossi in. Like him coming in, and maybe he had to because of fuel situation, but he comes in with 30 laps to go. And then we hear at the end, like the reason he couldn't really push and the reason why he ends up finishing fourth instead of third is that he didn't have enough fuel to run full rich at the end, the way that the other cars at the end of the race were able to do so.
No, you could see it with Dixon. Exactly what you said. It's like, God, is he going to do this again? But you could tell he probably didn't have the power to get there at the end. And then, Arrow McLaren was in an interesting spot because they kind of didn't. They probably should have bifurcated their strategy and just really gone like, all right, Pato's doing one thing and Rossi's doing another. They kind of made him do the same, but just had Rossi do like a 12% worse version of it. And they kind of, this is where having multiple cars up front can be good and can be bad, because if you're Penske, it's like, all right, we can focus all of our attention on Newgarden, and just all of our strategists can just go focus on his car. Something Ganassi's always done really well is like, it's kind of Scott Dixon's team. Pelot's getting better, but for years it was like, we'll focus on Dixon. It did feel like Arrow McLaren wasn't quite sure who they wanted to really push, and just let them figure it out. And
yeah, I think to some degree it almost felt like they believed that they were going to have two cars up front. Penske was only going to have one, and they were going to be able to tag team Newgarden out. And it's almost right. What happened. I mean, because they got both cars passed very late in the race, and then Newgarden was able to go right back around Rossi again, I think, again, because of the fuel thing. And it ends up being one of those situations where I understand what they were trying to do in theory, but it largely required Penske to not have a car that could handle all of those different conditions. And I'm fascinated how Newgarden's car was able to do that, but McLaughlin's wasn't. But it was just interesting kind of watching that interplay. And I don't think that Aaron McLaren was wrong necessarily. I just think they didn't play their hand as well as they could have.
And then you get down to, you have Newgarden and Award, and that was just fascinating to see. I think Award had a run, and it's like, nope, I'm going to hold it, because like they're all trying to figure out when is the best time to pass, to be in a spot where you can, not be passed in lap 200. And man, Newgarden did it again. And all I could think about, he did it again. And it was really interesting hearing, I don't want to jump to the end here, but, hearing Award's comments afterwards, he sounded really bummed out, like really broken, and like, damn it. Yeah. Like, I was like, I love this place. I'm close. Like he's starting to get that spot. Like, these are the things that make people endear you to them. Like, it's funny. I was, this is a little bit off topic, but driving back with my wife, just kind of being like, there's not, she was really a fan of Sato. I was really a fan of Kanan. I have a lot of drivers that I like and some that I don't, but there's not a lot of drivers left that I really have strong, like, God, I want this guy to win, or I really want this guy to lose. And maybe it's just me walking around. Like, I don't remember seeing as many, like, just jerseys for certain drivers as before. Like, it does feel like there's a very neutral feeling around the paddock about some of the drivers. Like, there's really not even the cheers when they were announced. It wasn't, Elio obviously gets a big cheer, but everyone else is kind of like, all right, they're all the same. Award is starting to build up that reservoir of somebody who it's like, all right, I can see a lot of people really going for this guy, because, what fans care about, it sounds crazy, but I think this, like, fans care about people who care about the 500. So they want drivers who seem to understand how important it is, seem to want to win, versus like, a little like when Dario came in and won his first one. It's like, oh, like, this is just another race. Like, it's a big race, but just another, like, that pisses off fans more than anything else. So anyway, I took that away. Like, the way O'Ward lost, the fact that he's had a good, 3 or 4 years here and really seemed broken up by it. I take that away as, like, I could see him coming back next year with a lot of new fans being like, this guy is somebody I'd like to see win.
Yeah, and I think Rossi is still in that category, despite having already won. It's one of those things where it was an interesting thing in my area, like the split between people who were rooting for Newgarden and people who were rooting against Newgarden. That was really the split. I think there were a lot of people in my section, and I had a friend over in turn 2 who found the same thing. Like, people really didn't want Newgarden to win, and I certainly understand. I don't have a problem with him winning. I mean, he drove a really great race, and that turn 3 pass, I mean, right in front of me, is in the top 3-4 moves I think I've ever seen at Indy. I mean, I'm trying
out where there was like, and they were saying, there's probably more grip because it was colder, but it's like, you still have to have the balls to be like, hey man, I'm going to go out there and hope there's grip. Because if there's not, I mean, a lot of people are just that far out. That's in the wall and you're done. You're toast. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to, you can go back to Sam Hornish's pass on Marco, at the end of the race in 06, but that felt like, that whole lap, it just felt like inevitability that Hornish was going to catch Marco. This did not feel inevitable. And, it really did kind of feel like when O'Ward passed him, and when he did that insane blocking maneuver coming out of 2, it's like, okay, there's no way. And I go back to it, and I'm like, what could O'Ward have done differently there? I don't know that he could have. I mean, he could have tried to get a little more central into 3, but then I think Newgarden probably sweeps underneath him and tries to go down on the low side. Like, I'm not sure that there was a way you were going to stop that run.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting watching that whole thing take place, and the vibe in the crowd was just like, wow, after that happened, which you don't get that often in Indy. And I think even in the last couple of races, it was a situation where those races were exciting finishes and there were passes very, very close to the end. This one felt like it exceeded that by a pretty wide margin.
No, I totally agree. And that chess match is always fun. The two drivers going at each other is fun. And, I was thinking about it too. I totally understand why people are against Newgarden because of the Penske stuff, but that feels very insular. Like, that's something that, this is where, and I'm not saying people can't have their feelings, but it's like, this is where IndyCar needs to kind of get out of its own way and just not, get over it. Like, if you want to bring more people into the paddock and more fans into this group, like, you've got to promote a guy like Joseph Newgarden. And the push to pass thing, like, that is so minuscule and so insider baseball. It's like, I get why people are pissed, but it's like, this is, we talked about the narratives in our preview pod. This is a great win. This is an American driver. He's got a shtick at the end of a win. And he puts it on the line when it matters most, which is something that I think a lot of people are into.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I would have liked to have seen, and we talked about this in the pre one, I would have loved to have seen a Ward or Pillow or Rossi win. I think those would have been great stories. But, and I think you're never going to have a situation where the crowd is going to be that happy about a team cheating, even on something as technical and minuscule as that, and then getting excited. But again, it is hard to win the Indy 500 under any circumstances. To win it twice in a row, it hadn't happened in close to 25 years or 20 years. And so it is cool to see that happen. It's cool to see it happen with American driver. It's like almost everything that everybody's asked for, except for the fact that they had this scandal earlier on in the season. But push to pass doesn't exist at Indy. So it's like not even a thing that happened in that. It was just a really, really well-driven race. And again, Penske, as we talked about, made fewer mistakes than Arrow McLaren, and it felt like that ended up being, at the end, what made the difference. So
yeah, and now you put Newgarden in this, he's the first one going for 3 in a row. It hasn't happened since, obviously, Elio, again, a Penske driver in 2002, I think was the second one. It's, it puts him in a spot where he could really take a historical spot here. And, and again, just looking at Award, his last 4 Indy 500s, he finished 4th, 2nd, 24th, and 2nd. I guess his last 5, he's 6th, 4th, 2nd, 24th, 2nd. That's a hell of a run. I mean, two solid seconds and almost win. Like, this is, you're getting into like the best driver on the series who hasn't won territory.
Yeah, it's at the end of it all, it's hard to do this stuff. And, but this is nice because now it feels like Arrow McLaren is like a consistent contender. So now you've got 3 teams that look like they're actually like regularly able to compete. So anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap up as there's not a whole lot else to say about the race. Yeah. We'll talk a little more IndyCar as we move forward. But Scott, as always, great to talk to you about this stuff. And we hope you folks enjoyed it as well. We will talk to you folks soon. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. We will catch you folks on the flip side. I'll say bring back the Bison, even though it's not an Indy 500 thing. We'll talk to you guys soon. So long, everybody.